Welcome to Station 8. At this station, Abdullah and Meshari tell us about Trimester 3 and everything about the IELTS exam.
Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to the SRPodcast. This is your host, Abdullah and
Meshari.
we are here to help you to get the most of your IELTS preparation.
Our friends already discussed the Trimester 1 and 2. In this episode, we'll be discussing the Trimester 3 and the ins and outs of the IELTS exam, from what it is and how it works, to tips and tricks for success.
We will also be talking about common mistakes to avoid and how to make sure you are ready for the test day.
So if you're looking to advice on how to ace your IELTS exam, then this is the episode for you. And now we have an interview with Mr. Shabazz.
Assalamu alaikum. Welcome, Mr. Shabazz, our broadcast, SRPodcast.
Okay, thank you for having me.
First of all, tell the audience a bit about yourself.
Okay, my name is Shabazz Hanif, as you know. I've been working in ELT for nearly 2 decades now. I started teaching in the Manchester region in England, because that's where I'm from. I also taught in China, and I've been here in Saudi Arabia since 2010. And I'm currently working at SRP.
Nice. So, can you tell us about the speaking exam?
Okay, yeah, the speaking exam is obviously there are four skills that you need to know about the IELTS exam itself, but speaking is one part of it, and it consists of 3 parts. The speaking is the introduction and the interview, which is the first part. Part 2 is more of long term, we call it, where the trainee, the student, candidate has to speak for 1 to 2 minutes. And then the third part is about just the topic of part 2. We're talking more about it. It's more of a discussion.
Amazing. Students often make mistake when taking speaking test. What are some of them?
I've come across a few mistakes in my time. I'd just like to mention a couple. The first one, I would say, is when they use big unfamiliar words. Okay, not knowing what the particular word means and using it incorrectly has a negative effect on the band score.
Okay.
And another, let's give you one more, which is they actually use memorized answers. Now, this is a major problem because the questions used for practice are not exactly the questions used in the exam itself. So they may be similar, but they're never the same.
Amazing. So what should focus on during the speaking exam?
Okay, during the exam itself, the candidate should actually be, they should relax and be themselves, okay? But what they should do is, before the exam, they should make sure that they know what the examiner wants. So this is before taking the exam, okay? So a number of weeks beforehand, they should study and find out. Now, the examiner looks for certain things in the exam, so the students should actually know what they look for and make sure that they study each part.
Amazing. If you could give the audience advice, what it would be?
Prepare well for the exam before actually doing it, because preparation is extremely important. Okay, especially when it comes to the IELTS exam.
Thank you, Mr. Shabazz. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome.
And now we have an interview with Mr. Tom.
Hi, Mr. Tom. How are you doing?
Right.
Welcome to our SRPodcast. And today we want to ask you a few questions about listening skill.
Great.
First of all, can you tell the audience a bit about yourself?
Right, so my name is Tom Larson. I'm a teacher of English as a foreign language. Have about, nearly, I think, 20 years of experience in that field, so quite a lot. I've been in Saudi Arabia for about 5 years. at SRP over 3 years now. So mainly teaching English, but also IT, foundation IT as well.
Nice. Second question, which type of study method do you recommend for preparing for the listening exam?
The listening exam. So listening exam checks your understanding of the spoken English. So there are two things, I think. First of all, you need a lot of exposure to the language. So that will be my first advice. Make sure that you're getting exposed to the language a lot. So this is something I always advise my students when they come to SRP. Find, a podcast or a YouTube channel, something that interests you. So something connected to your interest. That's important because if you listen or watch to some content which really doesn't connect with you, it will not help you that much. But everybody has some hobbies or interests. So if you're interested in football, find a podcast or a YouTube channel about football. If you're interested in history, try to do that. So basically any hobbies that you do in Arabic, try to do them in English. Then you're watching, listening, etc. And that in that way you get used to what the language sounds like, to the melody of the language, or also to how it is structured, to the grammar. Even without even noticing it, you are picking up these things, different accents, different ways that people express ideas, in which people express ideas. So that is quite important, I think. And what's important here as well is I think you should do it a little bit every day if possible. So rather than doing it once a week at the weekend, try to do it half an hour a day in during times when you don't really do anything else, or when you do something else, like you at the gym, or you drive, or you go for a walk. And nowadays, I think there is no excuse. You can find a lot of content on the internet about anything really you can imagine. You can find it, especially in English. And so there's one thing for preparation of the exam. And another thing is knowing the exam. So you need to know about the structure of the exam, about the kind of questions you should expect. And then you should practice that, get a lot of practice doing the actual exam. But this is something we focus on in class. So that's what we do at SRP. But the first part I mentioned, you should be doing it on your own, really. Getting as much exposure as you can, like immersing yourself in the language.
Okay, good, amazing. Students often make mistakes when taking listening test. What are some of these?
Right, so there's an obvious mistakes are spelling mistakes, because listening is you have to write down your answers, and that's a big problem. That even if you get the correct answer and you misspell it, you're not getting any points in IELTS, really. So misspelling of the words, that even if you have found the correct answer, yes. So that's one thing. So that means that really, apart from the listening I mentioned before, you should be doing a lot of reading as well, too, which you can really, you can find, for example, podcasts that give you a transcript. So you can do that. You can listen and read at the same time. So the first type of mistake, that's spelling mistakes, and the other one is not understanding the instructions. So that is very common as well. So if they ask you to write letters A, B, C, D on your answer sheet, and write words instead of that, even if your answer is correct, you will not be given a point. But that's what we stress when doing preparation for IELTS listening.
Okay, amazing. What should I focus on during the listening exam?
So during the exam, you should read the instructions carefully, and you should spend the 20 seconds you are given actually reading the questions, identifying keywords, because what I often see is students or candidates waiting for the recording to begin, looking around instead of looking at the paper and trying to see what is actually required of them during this listening exercise.
Amazing. If you could give the audience any advice, what would it be?
Advice during the exam
For the listening skills.
All right. So do a lot of practice, and also you have to remember that as any part of the IELTS exam, it's designed to really to test from very low levels to very advanced levels. So it's natural that you will not get all the answers. Even native speakers sometimes have problems of getting all 40 answers to this test. So you should not panic if you realize that you missed an answer or two. Just move on, listen to the next one. Okay, your aim is not perfection. It's very, very rare for somebody to get 40 correct answers. It's enough to get about 20 to get band 5. We're trying to obviously to aim higher, but you can see the idea here. Some, especially part 4, is quite difficult. So if you get any answers in part 4, that's a bonus, right? You should focus probably on part 1 and 2, 3, and get most of your answers out of these initial sections.
Thank you, Mr. Tom.
All right. You're welcome. Thank you very much.
And now we have an interview with Mr. Rahid.
Assalamu alaikum. Good morning, Mr. Rahid.
Wa alaikum assalam. Thank you very much for having me on your podcast.
First of all, tell the audience a bit about yourself.
Okay, so to start off with, my name is Mr. Rahid, as you may know. I'm from the UK. I've been working in Saudi Arabia for around 5 years now. I started off in Riyadh. So I worked in a medical university first as a prep year teacher. And then after that, I went to the military. So I'm not too sure if you guys are very familiar with that. But in the military, King Fahd military. So I taught the cadets English again. And then I made my way to Bureda SLP.
Nice. The second question, which type of study method do you recommend for preparing for the reading exam?
Okay, so every person, they may have their own method, and people follow a specific type of methodology. I would say, just generally speaking, there are many different things that you should know before taking the reading exam. So you should identify what types of questions do they have in the reading exam. So they have like 14 different types of questions, and it's very important to understand what each type of question is, so you can then break it down and have a clear understanding when doing the reading exam. So for example, you can do skimming and scanning. So skimming and scanning is a technique that you can use to answer some of the questions. I would suggest people develop the speed reading skills, because obviously, as you know, that this exam is a timed exam, and we need to be able to read at a specific amount of speed before taking the exam. Developing your vocabulary. So usually, as you know, us teachers, we ask you guys to get yourself a book. And the reason for this is obviously the more vocabulary you have, the better understanding you will have of texts. If you want me to continue,
It's took me.
yeah. So keywords, for example. underlining keywords or highlighting keywords, especially in questions. So you're looking for the keywords in the question and the passage. So once you identify a keyword, you kind of know, all right, this is my answer is going to be somewhere around here. Getting used to difficult passages. So what people tend to do, or what students generally tend to do, is they look at different reading passages online and they go for the easy one and they keep on doing the easy ones, and then all of a sudden they get a really hard one in the exam and they say, oh my God, I found it very difficult. However, what you can do is, when you are practicing before you do your IELTS exam, is actually try to target the more difficult passages. So then when you do take your actual exam, you might not be shocked. And the last thing I would like to say is practice makes perfect. So the more you practice, obviously the better you're going to get at it. And then hopefully when it's your turn to do the exam, you can pass it with flying colours.
Okay, amazing. And then the third question. Students often make mistakes when taking reading the exam. That's what they.
Okay, so when it comes to students making mistakes, one of the skills in IELTS, as you guys probably know, the most difficult one, what students find, is the reading exam. So with the reading exam, there are specific rules that people should follow to ensure that they don't make these mistakes, such as, not trying to read the passage word for word, because there is nobody there who is actually asking for your understanding of the passage, and we don't have too much time. So building on your skills such as skimming and scanning, being able to read the full passage within 2 to 3 minutes, and then answering questions. Obviously, taking your time when reading the questions. So this is something that I prioritize when I'm teaching my students. I tell them, read each question at least 3 times. Understanding the question is very, very important, because there are some quantitative words, for example, like some, many, all, etc. These type of words, they can change the full meaning of a question. So it's very, very important to actually have a look at the question and read it and understand it and analyze it. Moving on, I'd like to also say that people like to assume. So assuming in a reading exam will not help you a lot. For example, just a quick question I would like to touch upon is in a true, false, not given. So when it comes to true, false, not given, the question, for example, states, do you guys watch football?
Of course.
Yeah. So you must know Lionel Messi, for example. So
Greatest.
Exactly. So we've got Lionel Messi, for example. In the passage, it says Messi kicked the ball with his left foot. Okay. So it doesn't say, if it says Messi headed the ball, so then we don't know if Messi headed the ball, so it's not given. If it says Messi kicked the ball with his right foot, then you know the answer is false. And if it matches in the passage same as the question, then the answer is true. So people usually what they do is they assume the answer, and then instead of writing not given, they write false. So instead of writing false, they write not given. So that's another way to kind of have a look at it. And then like I touched on before, please don't read the full passage. Nobody's checking your understanding word for word. You don't have too much time. And a lot of people, what they do is they split up the section so that for the reading you have 3 sections. For example, what they'll do is they'll do section 1 20 and then section 2 20 and section 3 20. What I would suggest is taking 15 minutes on section 1, 20 minutes on section 2 and 25 minutes on section 3. The reason for this is because usually the sections, as they go along, the more difficult that they get and the more time you may need to answer your questions. If you don't mind me asking a few, let's tell us more. Spelling is very important. Spelling when it comes to writing your answer, the one letter in the whole word can make a big difference. For example, government. So people tend to miss out the end. So they'll spell it Government. So this is the incorrect spelling. That's why it's very important to kind of get your vocabulary up to base and take spelling very important. And the last thing I'd like to add is follow the instructions. So there are some questions which say write no more than 3 words or a number. People don't tend to focus too much on this, and they get the correct answer. However, because they wrote an extra word, they will not get the answer for the question, basically.
Okay. What should I focus on during the reading?
So from the things that I have mentioned, what I'd like to emphasize on extra is reading the question. So read the question until you understand and analyze the question also, and read the keywords inside the questions, because what happens is people are very casual when they are reading a question. One word can change the whole meaning of the sentence. So it's very important that you read the question, you read it again, and then for the 3rd time, just to make sure you read this question again, because as you know, you've had experience, I've had experience where we read something very quickly, we write the answer down, and then later on we think, oh my God, we didn't take our time to read this question and we did it all in a hurry.
Okay. If you could give the audience any advice, what would it be?
The biggest advice that I could give the audience is by listening to all the answers I've given you guys, and be calm in your exam, and take your time, be calm. Obviously there is a time limit, so don't take too much time. However, practice makes perfect. The more you're going to practice, the better grades you're going to get in the long run, because if you take your time and practice on a daily basis, obviously you will build more vocabulary, you will have more practice, and then that's the best way possible, I would think.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Wahid.
Thank you very much for having me on your podcast. It was lovely to join you guys. Thank you so much, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And now we have an interview with Mr. Ali.
Assalamu alaikum. Hello, Mr. Ali. How you doing?
Alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I'm doing good, man. How are you?
I'm good, alhamdulillah. You want to tell us about, and I will ask you a few questions about the writing skills
Okay.
in the IELTS.
So you want me to talk about myself first?
At the first, tell the audience a bit about yourself.
Okay, so my name is Mr. Ali Bilqasab. I have been working in SRP since 2014, and I am one of the teachers here, or the instructors. I'm from the UK, particularly Yorkshire, Sheffield. Yes.
Okay. Amazing. Which type of study method do you recommend for preparing for a writing exam?
Writing exam, as you are aware, is a skill. So the more you write, the better that you become at it, because practice makes it better. And at the same time, the more you read, the more you develop more vocabulary. So there's no specific method, but it depends on the purpose or the reason that you're taking the writing exam for. And what will aid you and what will help you is the more vocab you build and the more writing you do.
Awesome. Students often make mistakes when taking writing tests. What are some of them?
One of the major mistakes that the students make when they take in the IELTS writing examinations is particularly overthinking in terms of what vocabulary to use, and also they usually completely ignore the coherence and the cohesiveness of their writing. So it's important for them to understand that the more they practice, the better they become at it. And the only way you can overcome those mistakes is the more you write for yourself and give it to your teachers to correct it for you.
Awesome. What should I focus on during the writing exam?
What I would say is, and I always tell my students, is you need to focus the 4 areas, which is the task achievement. For you to understand the question and answer the questions accordingly will gain you more marks. And also cohesiveness and coherence, for your writing to be on the same wavelength, that is also important. Grammatical range, it's something that the students need to work on, because if you're talking about the past and if you're talking about the present and the future, you have to obviously dictate that to your writing as well. And last but not least is the lexical resource, which is building your vocab and also learning the root words and the word type.
Amazing.
If you could give the audience any advice, what would it be?
Regardless of you taking an examinations, it's always important to develop yourself and to develop all your 4 skills. So as I said earlier, just to reiterate, the more you read, the more you write, and the more you listen, the more you speak. So it's all about developing your skills by actually practicing. And as I said earlier, practice makes it better. So I would advise them to practice more and to have someone that actually corrects it for them. You can practice by yourself, but if someone not overwatching you and correcting your mistakes, you will always make those mistakes in the future.
Okay. Thank you, Mr.
It's my pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you for tuning in to our podcast today. We hope you enjoyed listening and gained some valuable insights from our discussion.
Until next time, stay curious and keep learning.